So my name is Jessica Martin, and I am the Outreach and Education Coordinator with the Butte Yuba-Sutter Water Quality Coalition. So I work out of our Butte Farm Bureau office. We also have Lindsay Hyde on here. She is our administrator, and she works out of the Yuba-Sutter Farm Bureau office. So first, I'm just going to give a quick overview of what the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program is. And then I'm going to hand the presentation over to Mike and then Franz to talk a little bit more about our management plans and how we can help to spray safe and hopefully have less exceedances in the future. So what is the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program? The purpose is to regulate discharge from irrigated agricultural lands for surface and groundwater. So there's 3 levels to this. We have the regulatory at the top, and that comes down from the State Water Resources Control Board. And then we have our Sacramento Valley Water Quality Coalition, and they help to oversee all of these subwatershed groups that you see here at the bottom. And one of those is Butte Yuba-Sutter, which is the subwatershed that you're all a part of. So Butte Yuba-Sutter, our role is to assist the members to comply with the regulations set by the Irrigated Lands Program. And so what does that look like? That means answering questions, providing assistance with reporting requirements. We also work directly with our monitoring staff like Mike, as well as ag commissioners to address any exceedances that come up. We plan educational opportunities to help focus on current water quality issues. So this would be an example of one of those opportunities. And then most importantly, we're here to provide a much cheaper option than having to report directly to the Regional Water Board. So as a member, what do you have to do? Your main requirements are to keep current on your membership dues and then complete your reporting requirements. Typically, those are due in February. So February 15th is the date that you need to have everything submitted. Other requirements include attending an outreach event, so this would count for that, as well as having an irrigation and nitrogen management plan, which is something you just keep on the farm. That's not something you're submitting to us. What you are submitting is your irrigated nitrogen management plan summary report. That's part of your online reporting that you do every year. We also have MPIRs. We just sent out emails for these, so you've probably received them. That's something that you're submitting online as well. And then your sediment and erosion control plan, if needed, on your property. And then we do a farm evaluation survey, and that's just every 5 years. So we're going to talk a little bit about exceedances. What happens when there's an exceedance? You're probably all familiar with this because we have had several exceedances in our subwatershed. So we will handle all communication and outreach. And that means that we're working with the regional board directly to satisfy their outreach requirements. And then we're communicating that information to the growers, letting them know that the exceedance happened and helping to provide best management practices to reduce the risk of future exceedances. So the current exceedances that we have in Butte Yuba-Sutter are at Pine Creek. That's what this meeting is focused on, as well as the Lower Snake River and Lower Honcut Creek. So these have all resulted in management plans. So I'm going to hand the presentation over to Mike now, and he's going to talk a little bit more about what those management plans mean for you as growers.
Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Truchon. I'm an associate scientist at Larry Walker Associates. We're located in Davis. And Larry Walker Associates has assisted the Sac Valley Coalition in their monitoring and reporting for about the past 18 years. And today I'm going to give you a little overview of monitoring, as well as a little bit of information on pyrethroids and the pyrethroid management plans that exist in the subwatershed. Water quality monitoring in the BYS subwatershed is based on two primary criteria. Those are the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, Pesticides Evaluation Protocol, and water quality issues identified from prior monitoring. The Pesticides Evaluation Protocol was developed in 2016, and we had to start implementing it, I believe, in the 2018 monitoring year. And the coalition is required to monitor for specific registered pesticides based on their application rate in a specific drainage. And each registered pesticide is assigned a relative risk score based on its toxicity to humans or aquatic organisms. So every year when we develop the monitoring plan for the forthcoming year, we look at the past 3 years of pesticide application data from the Department of Pesticide Regulation. And those data are basically geolocated, so we know where the pesticide application was made, and we certainly know the name of the pesticide and what the relative risk is, and that results in sort of a yes, we're going to monitor, or no, we won't monitor. So if there's, in my example here for pesticide A, there's little use and low toxicity, it won't be monitored. For pesticide B, there's little use, but it has high toxicity, and then we would be required to monitor that. And then the other reason why we monitor are for water quality issues identified from prior monitoring. So prior monitoring for a parameter, if prior monitoring for a parameter showed one exceedance, then the next year we would do what's called single exceedance monitoring. And if prior monitoring for a parameter showed 2 or more exceedances in a 3-year period, then a management plan would have been triggered, and then we would perform what's called management plan monitoring. And we will monitor under the management plan until the management plan can be completed. And the soonest the management plan can be completed is 3 years if there are no exceedances for the parameter in question. So what is an exceedance exactly, and an exceedance of what? It's an exceedance of a water quality objective. A water quality objective is a numeric value above which regulators believe, based on scientific information, that the concentration of some parameter, typically a pesticide, may potentially cause harm to humans or aquatic organisms. And there are about 112 water quality objectives in total that BYS monitoring data are compared to if and when a given parameter with a water quality objective is monitored. And in recent years, the exceedances in the subwatershed have been related to detections of pyrethroid pesticides. And just to give you a little bit of background on pyrethroids, they aren't new to us. They have been around since 1953 when some USDA scientists synthesized alethrin in a laboratory. And since that time, there have been more than 1,000 synthetic pyrethroid insecticides developed. These synthetic pyrethroids are developed to mimic a compound called pyrethrum, which is a natural insecticide found in chrysanthemums. And pyrethroids are highly toxic at very low concentrations to amphipods, such as Hyalella azteca, that are eaten by waterfowl and fish. Hyalella azteca is the little critter shown there on the right that looks like a super tiny shrimp, maybe. Pyrethroids are tightly bound to organic matter in the water column and also the sediment, making them less toxic to critters as organic carbon concentrations increase. Central Valley Pyrethroids Control Program identifies 6 pyrethroids for analysis and requires that the toxicity of each one be added together to determine if concentrations are collectively toxic to Hyalella. So we will monitor for or analyze for bifenthrin, cyfluthrin, cypermethrin, S-phenvalerate, lambda-cyhalothrin, and permethrin every time we monitor for pyrethroids. And then when we get the laboratory data back, we're looking for detections of those 6 pyrethroids. And if they are detected, then we need to, using a certain formula provided by the regional board, we need to add up the concentrations and figure out if the collective concentrations are high enough to cause toxicity to Hyalella. And in terms of the different levels of toxicity of those 6 pyrethroids, bifenthrin is the most toxic, and permethrin is the least toxic. In looking at pyrethroid data coming from the BYS subwatershed over the last 3 or 4 years, I can tell you that bifenthrin and lambda-cyhalothrin are the 2 most commonly applied pyrethroids. Just to let you know how toxic pyrethroids are, this figure here shows you a little bit of a comparison between bifenthrin and chlorpyrifos. You might remember chlorpyrifos from several years ago. It was commonly used insecticide and was found in lots of water quality samples and at levels that caused concern. And so the state eventually banned the use of chlorpyrifos by irrigated agriculture. But the chlorpyrifos had 2 different water quality objectives. There's this green colored line there, which is the chronic objective. And then there's that purple colored line, which is the acute objective. And then if we go down and look at that orange line, that is the objective or the pyrethroid trigger limit when we're looking at pyrethroids. So that green line is actually, and I guess it's better to say it this way, the orange line is 15 times lower in concentration than that green line. So we're really talking about very, very small concentrations of pyrethroids at the nanogram per liter level that can ultimately result in an exceedance. Some of the regulatory background for why we're monitoring pyrethroid pesticides is that the Central Valley Water Board released a proposal for the control of pyrethroid pesticide discharges in the Central Valley in February of 2017. Central Valley Water Board adopted that plan. And it was basically a pyrethroid TMDL and a basin plan amendment. They adopted that in June of 2017. And that basin plan amendment also includes a conditional prohibition of pyrethroid pesticide discharges, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Within this Central Valley Pyrethroids TMDL, there were, I think, 8 water bodies in the Sacramento Valley that actually received a TMDL. So different dischargers that discharge to those water bodies are highly regulated in terms of how much pyrethroid any different discharger group can apply and still meet the TMDL requirement. Fortunately, the Sac Valley Coalition, none of the water bodies it monitors is part of the TMDL, but the Sac Valley Coalition, and as well as all the other coalitions in the Central Valley, are regulated by this basin plan amendment and this conditional prohibition of pyrethroid pesticide discharges. And really what that means is that the conditional prohibition is that if there are pesticide concentrations measured that exceed this trigger limit, and that happens more than twice in a 3-year period, or 2 or more times in a 3-year period, then there's going to be the requirement to develop a management plan. So future use of pyrethroids in that drainage and represented drainages are contingent upon a coalition developing a management plan. If the coalition decided, well, we're not going to develop a management plan, then the future application of pyrethroids in that area would be prohibited. On the third bullet here, the Sac Valley Coalition was required to begin monitoring for pyrethroids at representative and integration sites under the pesticide evaluation protocols in January of 2018. Again, that pesticide evaluation protocol is based on usage of a pesticide in a particular drainage. The Pyrethroid TMDL and Basin Plan Amendment were approved by the State Water Resources Control Board in July of 2018 and approved by the Office of Administrative Law on February 19th of 2019. Whoops, sorry about that. And because this Basin Plan Amendment includes a TMDL, the US EPA needed to approve the Pyrethroid TMDL portion of the Basin Plan Amendment. That happened in April of 2019. And really any exceedance of the pyrethroid trigger that has been observed from May of 2019 onward, we've had to report to the Central Valley Water Board as an exceedance. And then part of this Basin Plan Amendment also included a requirement for all coalitions to perform a year of what's called baseline pyrethroid monitoring. And we did that starting in October of 2020. With that monitoring, we started to detect pyrethroid pesticides at concentrations greater than the trigger. And so there was a management plan for pyrethroid pesticides triggered in the Lower Snake River in July of 2021, a management plan in Pine Creek triggered in August of 2021, and a management plan for pyrethroid pesticides in the Lower Honcut Creek drainage and represented drainages that was triggered in in January of 2022. And in this far right column here, I have the status. Remember I said that a management plan can't be completed any sooner than 3 years, and that's 3 years since the last exceedance. And so for Lower Snake River, we actually just had an exceedance last month. So the soonest that management plan can be completed, if there are no other exceedances in the future, is going to be summer of 2026. For Pine Creek, as soon as the management plan can be completed is winter of 2025. And for Lower Honcut Creek, the soonest the management plan can be completed is fall of 2025. And I just wanted to echo Jessica's mention of the management practice implementation reporting information, MPIR. Those surveys have been sent out. It's very important to fill those out and return them to Jessica or Lindsay or whoever distributed those surveys. For the 2021-2022 monitoring year, this table provides an overview of what was detected in terms of pyrethroid pesticides in the Lower Snake River. We had in January of 2022 bifenthrin and S-phenvalerate detected. In April of 2022, there was toxicity to Hyalella, the test organisms, and that was sediment toxicity, but the cause of that toxicity is unknown. It was not caused by pyrethroids. In May of 2022, there were detections, or these would be exceedances for cyfluthrin and lambda cyhalothrin. In Pine Creek, in June of 2022, bifenthrin was the cause of an exceedance, and then in September of 2022, bifenthrin and S-phenvalerate were the cause of an exceedance. In Lower Honcut Creek in January of 2022, S-phenvalerate caused an exceedance. In April of 2022, again, there was unknown toxicity to Hyalella in the sediment. Not sure what caused that, but it wasn't pyrethroids. In May of 2022, at the Lower Honcut Creek monitoring site, lambda cyhalothrin caused an exceedance, and in July of 2022, bifenthrin caused an exceedance. And as you can see, bifenthrin and lambda cyhalothrin, especially bifenthrin, are pretty common causes of these exceedances. Here's a look at the current monitoring year, the 2022-2023 monitoring year. The monitoring years always start on October 1st of one year and then end on September 30th of the following year. The Lower Snake River, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, just had an exceedance on May 16th, so just last month. And that exceedance was caused by bifenthrin and lambda cyhalothrin. There was also water column toxicity to Hyalella, and because of the concentrations of the bifenthrin and the lambda cyhalothrin measured in that Lower Snake River water sample, it's pretty easy to conclude that the Hyalella toxicity was caused by the bifenthrin and lambda cyhalothrin. So far in Pine Creek this year, no exceedances, which is great news. There's the active management plan, so please be careful when applying pyrethroids. Similar situation for Lower Honcut Creek. We've been out there twice this year, no exceedances. So if you happen to farm in the Lower Honcut Creek area, please be careful when applying pyrethroids. Here's a series of time series plots that just shows you what's going on at the three monitoring sites that we monitor for the Yuba-Sutter subwatershed. This is a Lower Snake River and the Wastrel Road. I don't know if you can see these very easily, but there's this dashed line, which is basically the line at which above that you have an exceedance of the pyrethroid prohibition. There are some open circles that plot down at the bottom of this graph, and those are non-detect. It is possible to detect pyrethroids in a water quality sample, but not cause an exceedance. So these light blue dots are examples of those. If you remember, I said that the organic carbon concentration present in the water column really has an influence on whether or not those pyrethroids are available to harm anything living in the water. And so if you have a high organic carbon concentration, then the pyrethroids are less available and don't result in an exceedance. So that is what those blue dots would signify. And then the red squares are when there's a chronic exceedance, and then occasionally when we have super high detections at a site, then we end up with these purple triangles here, the acute exceedances. Moving over to Pine Creek at Highway 32, you can see there's been a mix of non-detects. There's been some detections that didn't result in an exceedance, and then we have chronic exceedances and acute exceedances. And it's a little confusing, but the trigger limit for both chronic and acute exceedances is this dashed line here. It's basically one. Well, it's a unitless number, but it's a value of 1, and it pretty much translates into a nanogram per liter. And so there's just two different calculations that one needs to make to determine if there's a chronic exceedance or an acute exceedance. And again, the acute exceedance occurs when the detected concentrations of the pyrethroids are really high. And I think, let's see, well, I'll go back to the earlier slide. Here's a super high detection of this was bifenthrin and lambda cyhalothrin in the Lower Snake River sample. This was just last month. And so you've got this value of 12 for the chronic measurement, and you've got a value of 4 for the acute measurement. Let me go to our last time series plot. This is for Lower Honcut Creek at Highway 70. Again, a mixture of non-detects, detected concentrations that didn't result in an exceedance, and then mostly here chronic exceedances and 1 acute. And in each of these plots, I have gone ahead and put a little banner here to show you when the baseline monitoring started. Let's see, some additional information is this year, as well as next year, the Sac Valley Coalition is operating under core or non-assessment monitoring, which means there is much less monitoring happening at all the coalition sites. However, for any pesticide, whether it's a pyrethroid or something else, we still need to perform the single exceedance follow-up monitoring and also the management plan monitoring. Starting in 2025, the 2025 monitoring year, which actually starts on October 1st of 2024, then we'll go back to the what's called the assessment monitoring, a much bigger monitoring effort during that year. And we monitor for either a single exceedance or a management plan monitoring in the same months as prior exceedances were observed. So if there was a pyrethroid pesticide exceedance observed in May of last year, then we got in May of this year to see if the problem still exists during that month. We have some upcoming monitoring in July and August for Lower Snake River with respect to pyrethroids, upcoming pyrethroid monitoring in Pine Creek, June, July, August, and September, and then upcoming pyrethroid monitoring in Lower Honka Creek in July and September. And so the take-home message is please be careful when applying pyrethroids, because just a minuscule amount making its way to the water body can result in an exceedance. And now I can take any questions if anybody has them. All right, well, thank you very much for letting me present this morning.
You want me to share my screen, Jessica?
Yes, Franz, if you want to go ahead and take over, that would be great.
Okay. See if I get it right.
Hey, Franz, this is Bill Chance. I have a question about the last speaker. I just don't type very well, so I thought I'd maybe just see if I could ask it orally.
Sure.
Sure.
So it seems like, I focus on Pine Creek because that's in our area. We've had these repeat exceedances.
Yeah.
Obviously, these monitoring cost all us members more money. Can we identify basically if it's the same repeat offender? I mean, I know we're all in this together, but it just seems like there should be a better way rather than all of us pay for everybody.
It is a bit difficult to pinpoint the offender. After every exceedance, we go ahead and request the pesticide use reporting data from Lindsay or Jessica. They reach out to the county ag commissioner's office in the county in which the exceedance occurred. We get the PUR data and we go ahead and plot that to figure out, was there a lambda cyhalothrin exceedance 5 miles away from the site, or was there a lambda cyhalothrin application? Was there lambda cyhalothrin application 5 miles from the site, or was there a lambda cyhalothrin application like the day before we did our monitoring at a parcel that is just a half mile upstream of our site? So we can sort of limit to some degree those applications that are more likely to have triggered the exceedance as opposed to less likely. And so the sub-watershed coordinators are supposed to look at that data and figure out, gee, it seems like this grower right here just upstream applied a pyrethroid the day before we did our monitoring, and lo and behold, there was an exceedance for that particular pyrethroid in the monitoring sample. And then, make sure that they are touching base with that grower to, make sure that they have, all the BMPs in place to really limit the potential for the pyrethroid they're applying to, run off of their parcel and into the water body. And one thing that, I use the term runoff, well, that would be if the pyrethroid was in some liquid form that ran off the grower's parcel. But pyrethroid, mist that, lands on the surface, if it was a little bit windy, that those particles could be blown into the water body. If the super fine particles are actually drifting to some degree in the air, they could settle out on the water body. And so it's hard to pinpoint an exceedance to a single grower. It is sort of the bottom line for that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, I'm going to hand it over to Franz then to talk about effective orchard spraying.
Okay, thanks very much, Jessica. I'm going to be talking, as Jessica just said, on effective orchard spraying. And effective orchard spraying, includes managing your equipment and your application timing, so to keep the material on farm. Essentially drift management, or in some case runoff management. But just a reminder, if a careful effective spray applications is a really important component of IPM programs. Rust management, if you're waiting for an economic threshold, you have to be able to clean the problem up, and that's currently spray application. So rust management, scab management in almonds, mite management in all tree crops really relies upon economic thresholds, but having a backstop of effective spray application, and the application of pesticides using, and we're talking about air blast sprayers here. The goal of spraying it for effective control of the pest is a uniform pesticide deposition throughout the canopy, and that should really be adapted or adopted to say you want the deposition throughout the canopy and limit the losses of that product outside the orchard. And again, in a bit of a review, you want, pardon me, ag spraying should be, it's got to be effective, it's got to work, otherwise you wouldn't want to do it. It's got to be efficient, again, to save money and make it as efficient an application as possible to be effective, and then it's got to be safe. Otherwise, the community wouldn't allow it. That to remind you, especially with air blast spraying, regardless of the weather, the droplet drift risk is greatest at the edge of the field. And this is data from a few years ago. 0 feet being right at the application of a air blast sprayer running down the first full orchard middle, between rows 1 and 2, say on the edge of a field, and you're going out 100 feet away from the orchard, you see as gravity brings it out, you get a reduction in deposition, landing out on the ground. So what it comes down to is that the edges of your field are really the place to be super concerned about drift, based on the slide I just showed you. Once you're inside in this purple area of the orchard, you may have some dust material rising up and dissipating and being diluted in the atmosphere, but the real drift risk for short-term rapid drop out of of the air column is right around the edges. So the experts over the years have said that drift is just spray that misses the target and you don't control. So calibration is really important to make sure where you're spraying ends up on a target and there's less material available to drift. So the 3 key steps to proper air blast calibration and setup are airflow. Let's see, adjusting your airflow using ground speed, and directing the spray flow with nozzle selection and placement into the tree canopy. And because the tree canopy is not uniform, in the orchards that we farm now, that vase shape, you've got more leaves and nuts up at the top of the tree, you've got more shading out and fewer leaves down below. The upper part of the canopy needs to be is where you're trying to protect. More spray needs to go up there to provide good coverage. Much like when you're painting a house where you've got most the more surface area to cover, you need more paint there. And then finally, confirm delivery. Make sure that all you've planned for is really happening. Sprayer speed determines pesticide flow in the tree because most fans are not adjustable. There are some fans, plastic fan vanes that you can, on smaller rigs that are available in maybe in vineyards and dwarf orchards, dwarf apple orchards, but primarily the big fans, the 38-inch, 36, 38-inch fans, 40-inch fans that we're used to working with are mostly welded. So there's no way to adjust the airflow. Sometimes there's a gearbox, but those provide some reduction. But the real way of changing the amount of air from the sprayer going into the tree is by your ground speed, the amount of time that the fan has by each tree. And the analogy I've used before, but it's true, is the best speed for your sprayer is the speed that gets just enough material into the tree to fill up, to fill up the tree with the spray from from the air from the fan of your sprayer, which contains the pesticide. It's similar to the moving a hose across these cups, as it shows in the picture here. You want to move the hose just fast enough to fill the cups. If you move the hose too fast, you're not filling all the cups. As the analogy with the sprayer is, you're not getting airflow through the entire canopy and therefore good coverage. And if you're moving the hose too slowly, you're overfilling the cups. And the same thing would be true with the sprayer. If you're driving the sprayer too slowly, you're pushing spray past the tree. You're overfilling the tree, and that's costing you money and potentially allowing for spray drift to move past the trees themselves. Just seeing spray above the canopy is not a guarantee of good coverage. When the air blast sprayer is working like it is, you get quite a bit of ricochet outside the canopy, and you can see that from a distance, but it doesn't mean that spray went through the tree. It just bounced off the tree. So just checking your coverage just by looking from a distance and seeing, oh yeah, I've got spray up above the treetops, doesn't mean that spray went through the trees, and you need the spray to go through the trees to give you coverage. The best way to set the ground speed is based on upper canopy coverage. Again, we talked earlier, other upper canopies where a lot of your leaf area is, a lot where your nuts are, and anything that's not covered in the top of the tree, once the pesticide residue below that degrades, anything that survived in the upper part that got established can move down into your canopy. And so your spray application earlier was just delayed the inevitable. Whereas if you get good spray coverage all the way through the tree, hopefully you eliminate the pest, or you knock it down to the point where the beneficials and in the case of mites, can clean it up. But air movement is coverage potential. So I like to use a PVC pipe run up through the middle of the tree, and with a little bit of 18 inches or so of colored flagging on the end of it. You drive the sprayer through the orchard at a certain setting, gears and RPMs on the fan, and watch that flagging. You're assuming this is being done when there's not that much wind out, otherwise the wind will pick it up. But watch that flag I like to take a picture like done here or videotape it on my phone. But what happens is if you get, and while this flag is shown through the tree, basically imagine that so those flagging angles in the top of the tree on that pole. If the air stands out 90 degrees or more, 90 degrees or 180, the air is coming too fast, you can you can increase your tractor speed to get just air movement to the top of the trees. And you want that somewhere between just shy of 45-degree, the angle or movement of the flagging to show that you've got air moving up through the tree. That air is going to be carrying the pesticide when the sprayer is running with pesticide in it. And you do get air movement past the top of the tree, but not very much. And that's the Goldilocks just right target. If you're driving too fast, you don't get any air up there, and the flagging doesn't move at all. It's sort of a dead hang, or it moves just a little bit. And then if you're driving too slowly, you're wasting time and money, and you're blowing material past the tree, which is not helping either. So that flagging helps you dial in the ground speed that you want to get air movement to the top of the tree. And that's the hardest place to reach, is the top of the tree. And then once you've got that ground speed set, you want to dial in your the flow of the pesticide from the nozzles. And because you're fighting gravity, and because in most orchards, most mature orchards, you're going to have more nuts, more leaf area, more target in the top of the trees. The old saw was you wanted 2/3 of the spray flow, that's in gallons per minute, out of the top half of the open nozzles on that sprayer. You might have 12 or 13 ports on each side of the sprayer, but if you've got 8 open, you want the top 4 to be running 2/3 of the spray volume, and the bottom 4 to be running just 1/3 at the very least. Now, if you're in an older orchard like this with lots of shade out down low, lots of big tall trees, I'm very comfortable with up to 80% of the spray flow being in the top half of the open nozzles and much less down below. It's important to cover down below to some degree, but you don't need much volume down there. And the energy it takes to push the spray all the way to the top of these trees, you can imagine what it's doing to anything that's targeted down low. It's going to be blowing at quite a distance. So you want to limit the amount of material, because you've got less canopy there, and you've got a risk of it blowing much further. So you adjust your flow to match the canopy, and limit the stuff that'll blow laterally, especially as you get closer to the road or the fence line. Another thing to be aware of with this lateral flow through the lower part of the canopy is this most of the slide from the the Air Blast task force several years back. They documented, and which other researchers have shown, most of the spray that moves, that's lost, doesn't land, it doesn't land in the canopy, actually lands on the orchard floor. You do get a lot of material, you do get some measurable material coming out the top of the canopy, but you get quite a bit down low. As you can see in this picture here, there's these blue bars are spray lost at the top, 9, 10, 11, 12 meters way up high, but there's quite a bit more that comes through down below. And about 3% of your AI is lost out the tops in this particular measurement, but 15% of it was lost in the lower part of the canopy, where you just don't have the surface area, and you get quite a bit of force still coming off the fan. So smaller nozzles in the lower canopy, A, because you've got less to cover, and B, because you don't want to overspray there because of the risk of drifting beyond your target. So once you've got, and then there's your at 22 feet, now you're over 2 rows, and you still have material coming through, but in that then that's at 44 feet. So in that range between 22 and 44, you've still have quite a bit of material coming out. And if you're on the outside row, some of that material could reach the road or across the fence, where there's risk. Across the fence, there might be a ditch, there might be a creek. It doesn't with the orchards that go right up to those risky areas, you got to be careful with material. The biggest risk of material leaking out of your place is down low. So once you've got the sprayer dialed in with ground speed set and with your nozzles assigned, you can check your spray coverage using water sensitive paper. Surround clay is another thing you can use, but I like the water sensitive paper because it's so easy to, it's fairly easy to use. You can document it. There's apps out there that allow you to quantify the percentage of blue dots on those cards. You can store that if someone asks you, what's your spray program, you have it in hand, or you can use that to set up your sprayers in future years. So the T-jet nozzles arranged. Again, this is showing the more spray to the tops. You're those are the nozzle, the hole sizes. 8s being the biggest, 4s being about half the flow rate, 5s being somewhere in the middle. But that's kind of a setup in a mature almond orchard gets fairly uniform deposition in the trees, and it gets you this, which is qualitatively good uniform distribution of material throughout the canopy, even though you are pushing the majority of your spray material at 16 feet or higher. You do get some aid from gravity and good coverage down below. And this is at 2 miles an hour to 100 gallons per acre. And just as a reminder, good spray coverage is a light, even coating, not a heavy deposition. You want something where you just get the target to glisten. You don't want it where it's running off these yellow blobs at the bottom of the leaf here. This happens to be grape leaves, but the point's the same. Slides from Andrew Landers at Cornell. This is about, the one on the left is about 35 gallons per acre in grapes. One on the right is about 75 gallons per acre. You get total coverage, but you get runoff, and you can get phyto at the burned edges. You just want a thin, uniform coverage. And finally, your basic, double check your estimates, your calculations from the catalog. You want to measure your gallons per acre as gallons per minute by acres per minute, and your spray rate or the gallons per minute is determined by filling the sprayer all the way up full or to a point close to the top where you can make a mark. Either way, fill it up to a certain level. Run the sprayer up to the specs you have established from the ground speed rating, and whether it's RPMs in the tractor and the PTO that give you the flow rate you wanted. Get the sprayer up to that point. Turn on the nozzles. Run it for a certain amount of time. A minute, 2 minutes, a definite amount of time, and then shut off the sprayer and measure the amount of water it takes to you have to put back in the sprayer to get back to the point where you started. And that's that green arrow shows a flow meter, a mechanical flow meter that measures that pretty readily. You can do it with calibrated buckets. The flow meter in a garden hose is faster, and you can repeat it quite quickly. Either one of those methods works, a garden hose or with a flow meter or a calibrated buckets. Then so that's your gallons that gives you the gallons per minute from the sprayer. And then your land rate is you'd set the sprayer up with again at the RPMs and the tractor settings and the sprayer settings you did before. You drive it for a set distance. Take and measure how long it takes to get across that distance. So you've got feet per minute, and you've got your swath width is trunk to trunk. So whatever that swath width is times your feet per minute gives you square feet per minute. Take your square feet, put that into acres, and now you've got acres per minute. And then from your gallons per minute and your acres per minute, you get gallons per acre. That way you mix the right amount of material per your PCA's recommendation. So that's the overall quick run through on not only calibrating a sprayer, but dialing it in so the material you've got in the tank goes where you want it to go, and limits the amount opportunities for it to get around the target and be lost to drift. You're not going to eliminate it, but you've taken steps to A, do a better spray job, and B, leave less available for drift. Now, there are some tweaks you can do once you've got your calibration right. There's some things you can do to further limit drift, and we'll go through that real quickly here. Just put it on the table. Spray lost above the trees is ineffective. It can be lost. It's up in the wind, as you can see from all these different photographs. Some I've taken locally, and this one at the bottom in the middle there was taken in a dormant cherry orchard up north years ago. It's costing you some money. It's also bad karma. That picture in the upper right there was taken from a Highway 5 rest area up down by Patterson, you're probably familiar with, but no benefit and some potential downsides. Here you have the sprayer, or you've got drift, and there's the sprayer. The wind blowing, spray being applied on a windy day. Now, in this particular grower's situation, this is potassium nitrate sprays in prunes years ago. It's on their own property. There's no sensitive site nearby, but still an application being made in under really risky conditions for drift. So basically, a drift review, the simple stuff for growers is, which is the basic stuff. Light drops will drift. Heavy drops drop quickly. So when the experts used to say, look, it's spray drift when you don't control it anymore. Growers can control spray drift by just droplet size. If you're using larger drops, there's much less drift risk because larger drops are heavier and they won't go as far. Just to review to how far stuff can go, years ago, there was an aerial application at the island up here in the upper left. It was a helicopter application of two very, very hot herbicides. They were trying to do vegetation management. For some reason, the spray application, an aerial application, was made when the wind was blowing from west to east. And in the grapes in the Lodi area, there was quite a bit of symptoms found within the yellow boundary, which is miles from the application site. And there were some symptoms found at that blue line, some distance away. I mean, there's Highway 5. That yellow line is Highway 5 with the Six Flags, or the truck stop there at I think it's 12 and 99, 12 and 5, and then all the way over to Lodi. Gives you some sense of how far that material moved. I know a really sharp PCA who was doing work down there at the time. He was out looking at these sites, and he said, Franz, I just never knew this stuff could go that far. And it can. Under the wrong conditions, it can move a long way. So what can growers do to limit drift? Well, you can, some things you can do, droplet size, I talked about that a minute ago, to help reduce drift. These are 3 air blast sprayer nozzles. The T-Jet TXR, I believe. It's a hollow cone nozzle with color coding and ceramic inserts. Generally makes it very fine to fine droplets. We've got the old disc and core nozzles with whether it's stainless steel or brass, or here you got ceramic nozzle parts. They generally, depending upon the size of the nozzle, and you can adjust the swirl plate between 2-hole and 4-hole, but they tend to run a little bit larger droplet size for the same flow rate compared to the TXR on the left. And then on the right is an AI nozzle, an air induction. Some people call them Venturi nozzles that you might be familiar with if you're for Roundup applications in with a flat fan nozzle design. This one's a hollow cone nozzle design, but it's got the vent up here, and the vent tends to break up the droplets, and you get much larger droplet sizes exiting the nozzle. When you apply it when you use this on an air blast sprayer, you're putting these big fat drops out into a high-speed airstream. You get quite a bit of air shear, so your droplet size isn't, even though it in the catalogs it's much larger than anything else in this picture. Once it exits the sprayer, it gets blown up, and your you're probably very close to the range of the disc and core nozzle, the droplet size created by the disc and core. If you back off your airspeed, fan speed, you will make bigger droplets. But basically, you can make choices as a grower. You can go with the one on the far left, very fine, good coverage, but quite driftable. The one in the middle is a good compromise, more options as far as nozzle size, swirl plate options, which is not the case in the one on the left. And then on the right, you've got an opportunity for much larger droplet delivery, but you have to adjust airspeed and some other factors. So there's choices to be made. The one in the middle and the one on the right will give you larger droplet sizes with proper volume, gallons per acre. Both of those nozzles are very effective in controlling really hard to control pests like navel orangeworm. For navel orangeworm, spray volume is much more of a factor than droplet size in the research that we've done. Then gear up, throttle down is an option growers can do, especially when the canopy is light. This is work was done in prunes several years back. Down below, you see distance from the orchard, anywhere from 0 to 200 feet. The vertical scale is the micrograms, the amount of AI, lambda cyhalothrin is Warrior, brand name Warrior. When you use big drop, when you drive faster, and you can drive faster in late in the season when the leaf area is not that much. When you drive faster to keep 100 gallons per acre, you use bigger droplets, more flow rate, because you've got twice the ground speed, so you have to have twice the spray flow to keep 100 gallons per acre. So you're comparing here, the grower standard is D4s and 6s and an air blast sprayer, 2 miles an hour, full fan air, compared to 4 miles an hour, D10s and 12s, and low gear on the fan and lower RPMs on the tractor. You can see the amount of drift, how quickly drift drop is reduced with the low drift system, and how much further you get drift with the full air and the smaller drops and the slower speed that allows you to blow it out further. So this gear up, throttle down really does reduce. It saves you some money at the times when the canopy is light, and it reduces drift significantly. So again, the gear up, throttle down can be really important around the edges, and considering a buffer zone on the edges, maybe use a different pesticide on the edges when there's risk of drift. Considering what can you do around the edges to limit the amount of drift, to keep material out of the streams, out of your neighbor's field, off the road, all the things that could be trouble to you from a regulatory standpoint. And that material's not doing any good for crop protection. There are some things you have to manage around to manage drift. Pest pressure, sometimes if you might not wait quite as long to decide to put the spray on, so you could put the spray on a day when the weather's good relative to possibility of drift. That is wind direction. Also, just in general, which way is the wind blowing when you're deciding to spray, and then the relative humidity, particularly in the case of small droplets or lower gallonage. When you're spraying on a warm day with really dry air, you can have quite a bit of droplet evaporation, and the droplets get so small they're just like those dust specks in the light. They don't have enough energy behind them to splatter, to land on something. They drift around the targets. So there are some things that even with a well-calibrated sprayer, you need to make operator decisions. So here we show you that picture again. The wind is blowing right to left. As far as this one is a little bit less of a factor, but particularly for herbicides, inversions can trap plant active materials. Much like this dust, this is early morning, summer in the valley. A pickup truck has just run on the other side of this tomato field up against those, I think they're walnuts, but anyhow, it ran down the road and the dust came up and just hung there because it wasn't able to, there was a warm air cap that was holding it there. That could be, say, your herbicide that you put on either on the tomatoes or maybe on a strip spray went into the walnuts. And unfortunately, the inversion early in the morning is holding that, could be holding that herbicide right at tree level, canopy level, and you don't want to do that because you run the risk of hurting yourself, much less the risk of a breeze taking that and drifting it offsite. Whereas later in the day, when the sun warms up and the ground's warm, the dust from this disking operation is just lifting off and being dispersed in the air. This is data from deposition work we've done in almonds when the air is warm and dry at midday. In the valley in the summer, you can have significant evaporation and loss of deposition, loss of coverage in the tops of the trees. It takes a while for that. As the spray travels from the sprayer up in the canopy, it's moving through drier air and has to evaporate. The comparison is here on the left. You've got at 6 to 8 feet in the canopy. The higher the bar, the more spray that was recovered from the leaves and the tree. Early in the morning, it's 63 degrees Fahrenheit, and the relative humidity, the wet bulb temperature is almost the same as the dry bulb temperature. The humidity is really high. It's not saturated. There's no dew, but the humidity is 80+%, and you get good deposition. Higher in the tree, it's a little bit less, but it's harder to get the coverage up there. Whereas later in the day, right before noon, it's only 83, well, only valley in the summer, it's 83 degrees Fahrenheit, but relative humidity is down below 40%. And you've got the difference in degrees centigrade between the wet bulb and the dry bulb is now 6 degrees. That delta 6 is significant because down low, you get good coverage, something pretty similar to what you got down low early in the morning, but higher in the canopy at 20 to 22 feet, you've got about half the coverage you did in the morning because of the evaporation and the smaller droplets and the fact that those smaller droplets just float around, they don't land. So that stuff that doesn't land, it's going to go someplace. It's I don't know if it's measurable nearby, but it's off it's out of your control, it's off your place, and someone with a careful sensitive device to locate, to measure that, could find it in measurement, and that's no help to you. So many growers have moved to night spraying in the summertime, or at least looking at spraying between, just for this, for generalization purposes, between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m. when the humidity is going to be higher and the temperature's lower. It's easier to spray. Just to be in a spray suit at that time, you're going to have better coverage, better deposition. The longer for things like agromech is going to work longer, work better because you're going to get more material into the leaf because you get less evaporation or slower evaporation. Night spraying is the best way to get your best results with agromech, and reduces drift as well. So some low-tech approaches to drift management provides ways of intercepting spray naturally. This is offset. It's your orchard layout. On the left, you've got planting on the square, and on the right, you've got planting on the offset square. Same amount of trees per acre. Just on the right, you've got each tree row, alternating tree row is planted halfway between the adjacent ones. So you could still be 24 by 16, but as you look down the row, perpendicular to the tractor aisles, you're seeing trees every 8 feet, and that can interfere with, can help slow. Here you've got on the square, especially when the trees are young, you've got this avenue between the trees where if you don't have a sensor device to turn off your spray flow, you're blowing material down between the trees. And it could be headed for the road or the neighbor's field or what have you. Whereas on the offset, you're spraying from that you're spraying from right here, this tractor aisle. It's not a straight route. You've got a tree intercepting it close nearby, and you're keeping the material on the farm and on your crop. So To review, there are some things you can do to help reduce drift. Droplet size, the nozzle design, D8s, 4s, and 5s give you 100 gallons per acre, but those 8s are targeting the part of the canopy where you've got more material. The 4s are smaller. There's just less material being directed that way, and that can help reduce the amount of material that could move. Droplet height, release height, you don't want to you want the spray to go just above the canopy. You don't want to blow it above the canopy because the wind will take it and it's lost. That can be adjusted. The droplet release height is adjusted by ground speed. And then buffer zones, we talked earlier about just being hyper aware of the potential for loss around the edges and what you can do to reduce that loss. So take home points on spraying: match your ground speed to the canopy size, match the nozzle output to the target, then check your gallons per acre, and check your coverage, and check the weather, watch the weather. So you're not taking all that careful work you did in points 1 through 4 and then spraying in a wind that's blowing onto the road. And you're gonna have trouble with good coverage anyhow, because you're spraying in the wind. The fan is designed to move the spray materials through the canopy, but if the fan has to fight the wind, that limits your the fan's ability to do its job. Take home points on drift. Spray drift is manageable. It's not always not always easy to eliminate, but you can certainly reduce it significantly. Have a plan, keep records, train your employees, pay attention to changes. Match sprays to the target. Medium, large droplet sizes drift less, they're heavier. Adjust your droplet size with nozzle selection and airspeed. And then the hardest drift to manage is at the field edges. That's where pyrethroids are going to be biggest risk of drifting, oftentimes a very short distance to open water or to a ditch that's going to have water through it the next time you irrigate. Taking extra steps when you're close to those sensitive zones is the best way to keep the pesticide out of the creeks. And pyrethroids are the issue of the time, and that is they're effective but very hot on aquatic insects and the food chain they feed. But if it's measurable, it can be found, and making practices to eliminate drift in general is going to be critical to maintaining the use of spray application in the future. Let's set up your T-jet nozzles to match the canopy, just to review to that last point. Finally, there's a free air blast sprayer calibration on Tuesday, the 27th. That's 2 weeks from today. It'll be in Arbuckle before free. It's free. It's put on by the Almond Board of California. I'll be speaking there along with some other folks. We'll do some hands-on calibration work, demonstrate what I've just talked about here. You can register using this QR code. Again, it's put on by the Almond Board. It'll be at the Nichols Soil Lab on the Marine Avenue. The information is available on that if you use your camera to capture that QR code. It's good to see the presentation, but it's even better to see it in the field. So I hope you can make it. Again, it's free. So it'll be, I think it's 8 to noon. There's coffee and snacks in the morning and lunch involved, included. If you've got the time, and it's going into pulse split timing, could help you with the important steps to protect your crop. And thank you very much for your attention. I could take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, if you have any questions for Franz, myself, or if you thought of any more questions for Mike, now would be the time to ask them. You can type them into the chat or feel free to just unmute and ask. All right, well, if there's no more questions for today, then that's the end of this focused outreach meeting. But you can always reach me by email or phone if anything comes up. We're here to help. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, Franz.
Mhm.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care, Lindsay. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jessica. Appreciate it.
Have a good week.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care.